Welcome. Do you know what I wrote in my notes, friends? I said, I am so forward thinking here. I wrote, welcome to the 2019 TANC conference.
Is 2019.
I am such a forward thinking woman.
There you go.
All right, well, either that or I was just trying to erase the 2018 conference before it even started. Well, welcome to our conference. So to introduce myself to those who are here present at the Potter's House and to those listening to the live streaming, hello South Africa, and to those who will listen later when they select conference videos from the archives on paulspassingthoughts.com. Introducing myself is the most difficult part of my preparation. My name is Susan Dohse. I am the wife of Paul Dohse, daughter-in-law to Irma Dohse, mother to 3 marvelous men, Timothy, Benjamin, and Philip, the mother, which I affectionately call the other mother, to my precious daughter Heather and her brother Paul Jr. I'm a grandmother to 8 treasures, Blaine, Catherine, Brielle, Renette, Hannah, Jacob, Joanna, and Isaiah. And we cannot forget that we are fur parents to Fletcher the Bible Beagle, who we have affectionately nicknamed Bob Barker, and Twitch the Theology Cat. I teach. I believe that God gave me the gift of teaching. I am not saying this out of a prideful statement or self-glorification, although some would raise their eyebrows at my boldness to say those words. For 45 years and still counting, I have been involved in the world of education and have experienced adventures so profound that my heart bursts with the joy of remembering them. Presently, I am referred to as a developmental specialist, and I work with children ranging in age from birth to 3. If you look at the first slide, I have what the F, and the F refers to not the commonly heard word we hear now over the news, but it refers to feminism, feminists, and freedom. You remember this Women's March? It happened the day after the inauguration of our president. Each year, selecting a topic to research is a struggle. I struggled introducing myself. Now, selecting a topic to research is a struggle, and that decision usually comes because some part of me has been provoked. Whether it's my curiosity, or whether it's my lack of knowledge in a certain area, or whether or not my husband has provoked me, or a friend or a stranger has challenged me. This year, it was a provocation of my curiosity that occurred at a high school graduation party. Chit-chatting with a young lady who was the daughter of one of my previous students back in the day when I was teaching 6th grade at Xenu Christian, we began talking about where she attended church. She included a statement that made me do a mental, what's that all about? Her statement was, I am a Christian feminist. Well, living during the 1960s with the long hair on both guys and girls, mini skirts, flower power, hippie revolution, bra burning, women's lib, and civil rights movements, I was taken aback because feminism has always left a sour taste in my mouth. Being an ultra-conservative girl / woman, I always associated feminism with liberalism, anti-God, anti-country, anti-man, and anti-whatever. And then there was always the pro part of feminism, pro-abortion, pro-homosexuality, etc. You just cannot slap the name, label, Christian onto a set of ideas and sanctify it. And this was what went through my mind when this young lady told me she was a Christian feminist. So I went home and I began looking into this ideology of Christian feminism, which when you do this on Google, it takes you to feminine theology, it takes you to new wave feminism, and a whole different worldview opens up. However, before I could come to a consensus about Christian feminism and what that group's mission and platform was, I needed to look at feminism in general and determine just what was feminism's mission and platform. Well, it didn't take long into my research that I realized it wasn't feminism. It was feminisms. And it wasn't a mission, it was missions. And it wasn't platform, it was platforms. So if I were to call out a question to my friends here, what do you really know and understand about feminism? What would you say? Andy, what would you say? Real quick, in one sentence, what do you know and understand about feminism?
We're told that it's a way to seek equal rights for women.
Okay, a way to work for equal rights for women. Okay, anybody else? Okay, my mother-in-law confessed when I was talking to her about what I was going to talk about that she didn't even know what feminism was, and she's 85 years old. Feminism has its own history, its own heroes, and its own variations. And this feminist worldview has a direction that it wants to take women, and it wants to take men and our children. It wants to take America and the world. It's a destination of death, spiritual death, emotional death, physical death, and a cultural death. Feminism is more than a movement. It's a worldview, and it's a religious belief system. Evangelical, fundamental, born-again, justified, sanctified, glorified Christians also have their version of feminism as well. Now, I read many articles and interviews conducted with women who stated, I can be a Christian and a feminist. And then I read other articles from other women who said, Christian feminism is an oxymoron. Well, again, there's this tendency to slap that Christian label in front of an ideology and consider it holy. Well, Christian socialism, Christian schools, Christian marriages. So before we get Christian women on board a new bandwagon, we need to determine where it's taking us. Have you compared the missions and platforms and determined if this other worldview is the personal direction you want to take? Is this the place that you want your sons and daughters to pursue? And this so-called sanctified version of feminism, is this the road you want your family and your church, your Christian school, your home school group to travel down? Okay, class, get your snacks and drinks ready. It's time for history class. Basic Principles of Feminism Theory 101. The relationship between men and women has almost always been unequal and oppressive. All known societies have been patriarchal. And if you don't know what that P word is, it means males dominating females. All major social institutions have been characterized by male dominance. And those social institutions include economy, political systems, family, and religion. And in feminist theory, notice the last. Women have usually accepted their subordination to men. They have been socialized to believe ideologies that justify male domination. Whether you agree or disagree with these principles, these are the basic underlining principles that create the ideology of feminism. But if you look at it, 3 words should just pop out to us: authority, control, and submission. According to these 4 principles, conflict occurs because of gender inequality. Equality of men and women in the workplace, equality of husband and wife in the family, equality of male and female in society. So gender inequality is solved when there's a level playing field. Maybe yes, maybe no. When men are viewed as superior and women inferior, this is inequality. I didn't say when a man dominates over a woman. I just said when men are viewed as superior and women inferior. That's inequality. As a result of this inequality, we hear about the differences in pay and benefits, differences in career and job opportunities, differences in the role and status of a wife and mother. Inequality creates a dangerous mindset with a direction that's a downward spiral. And it creates such profound statements as, well, a woman's place is in the home. When men are viewed as superior and women inferior in the home, you hear this: I, the husband, am your authority. And then your identity is lost. Your identity is found in your husband. And then you hear this: why can't you just be submissive? And that becomes a common requirement for marriage, for a successful marriage. I am your authority. You be submissive. When men are viewed as superior and women inferior in the church, that pastor church authority plays in. This is how spiritual gifts are denied in the service of the church. How husbands relinquish their authority to the pastor in order to bring the wife back under godly authority. And the downward spiral of thought continues. I'm going to give you 4 personal examples. My first teaching position was in a Christian school. The pay was low. How low can you go? I brought home $78 a week.
Oh, wow.
Because the school came under the authority of the church, when the yearly budget approval meeting arrived, you remember those on Sunday night, and they pass out the budgets with the columns and the numbers and all of this. Every member of the church was given this handout that showed expenditures and proposals for the New Year's budget. Well, I was glancing down when it came to the page of the school. I saw, the salary for one of the teachers was higher than the other salaries. I'm going to repeat that. The salary of one of the male teachers was higher than any of the other women's salaries. Whether the woman had more years there or fewer years there, his salary was higher. I also saw the line where money was allotted for him to place in a retirement fund, and then health insurance benefits. The women teachers were not given funding in a retirement fund, and we were not given health insurance benefits. Well, if you know me, I have a question. And the answer I received was this: he is the head of his family, and therefore he is deserving of a higher salary. You are not the head of your family and are teaching as a kind of hobby. When I asked about the retirement and health benefits, the answer was, That's the responsibility of your husband to provide for your retirement and to take care of your health care. So in other words, only the male employees received and deserved benefits. Oh, this sounds so spiritual, doesn't it? But when I did this, I have another question.
Uh-oh.
They did not have an answer for, what about the single teachers here? They have no husband to provide retirement or health benefits. They're all by themselves. Why are not they given consideration? I did not receive an answer for that one. Other than it wasn't long before I was labeled a rebellious teacher, by the way. My second example. In church, I was always relegated to teaching the preschool Sunday school classes. And when I asked to teach older children, such as grades 4 through 6, the answer was, we have men teach those classes. Because you are a woman, you are not to teach men. Are 8-year-old boys now considered men? I thought you were considered an adult at age 18. Answer. You can teach a class of all girls, if we had one. But here, men teach grades 4 and above. Third example. Some of you who are listening do not know that I was married for 36 years to Wayne, and he passed away, and the Lord gave me Paul. This example is from when I was married to Wayne. I was walking in front of him as we were making our way to the exit of the church one Sunday evening. The next day, the principal calls me into his office, and this was beginning to be a very familiar place for me. And he told me that I needed to walk behind Wayne because I was not showing to any who was watching, particularly the children, that I was a submissive wife. Fourth example. My first husband's social hobby was to find the perfect high. He had many favorite drugs of choice, and marijuana was the cheapest one. We had not yet been married a year when he approached me with the suggestion that I try marijuana. He was sure I would like it. After all, the law is wrong, therefore it can be disobeyed. And here's the kicker. It will enhance our love life. Well, I answered, sorry, no. So, he pulled out a card, figuratively speaking. He pulled out the submission card. Aren't you to obey me and trust my decisions? I replied, no. This submission construct hounded our 36-year marriage. Now, I want to give you a springboard that will resemble a historical timeline, and I prophesy it will be boring, and I will hear sighs and snores from all over the world. So be nice and refill your cup with some caffeinated beverage and paste on your fake smiles. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines feminism as the advocacy of women's rights on the basis of equality of the sexes. Kind of like what Andy said. Well, in the historical timeline, we begin with a group of feminists called proto-feminists. Now, does anybody know what the prefix proto means?
Means first.
First. We hear it all the time. Prototype, which means the first model of something from which others are formed. We hear it in science class, protoplasm, which means the first shape or cell. And we hear it all the time now on the news. Somebody's not following protocol, which means the original system of rules. Well, before there was a movement titled Feminism, there was a concept of feminism. Men and women wrote about it, and they supported equality for both men and women, and historians sometimes refer to this as proto-feminism. Christine de Pizan, 1300s to the 1400s, first woman to denounce misogyny. Hannah Woolery, 1600s, skilled in physics and surgery, and I wish I had put this on there, physics, P-H-Y-S-I-C-K, and surgery, C-H-I-R-U-E-R-Y, surgery. She earned her reputation as a successful amateur physician in a time when female medical practitioners were unwelcomed. She authored household management books, and the one of interest and the one that was used the most was called The Gentlewoman's Companion, published in 1670, or A Guide to the Female Sex Concerning Directions of Behavior in All Places, Companies, Relations, and Conditions, from their childhood down to old age, viz. Children to parents, scholars to governors, single to servants, virgins to suitors, married to husbands, huswives to the house mistress, to servants, mothers to children, widows to the world, prudent to all, with letters and discourses upon all occasions, whereinto is added a guide for the cookmaids, the chambermaids, and all others that go to service. The whole thing being an exact rule for the female sex in general, written by Hannah Woolery. The most important 17th century feminist writer was a woman called Margaret Cavendish, and she was considered a prime example of what women could become through education. So if you look at these proto-feminists here, they do have one thing in common. Education. Education, either self-taught, Hannah Woolery, in the medical practitioner field. Christine de Pizan, she was taught in her arena of society there to read and write, and then used that to write about feminist ideals. And then we have Margaret Cavendish, who, even though education was frowned upon, used it to become all that she could be. I have to make sure. Then we have the Age of Enlightenment. Oh, we've heard that before. Little light bulb should go on. Hey, John Emmel, if you're listening, we've heard of the Age of Enlightenment. Jeremy Bentham. Oh, but you're talking about feminism, and it's a man's name. Men can be feminists too. Feminism, or feminists, is an ideology which holds to what? Equality between whom? Men and women. So you can be a man and be a feminist. He condemned many of the country's common practices of denying women's rights on the basis of these rights were denied to women because they had inferior minds. He had the chutzpah to stand up during the Age of Enlightenment and say these countries' practices of denying women's rights because they supposedly are inferior is wrong. Heavily criticized, by the way. Then there was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was the first feminist philosopher, and she wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women. She identified two things that women needed: education and upbringing. And this lack of education and lack of upbringing created limited expectations because it lowered the woman's self-image. And that low self-image was typically put on them because of a male perspective of the inferiority of women. And she wrote and presented to as many that would listen to her that, especially women, education and upbringing will help you change that self-image.
That would have almost become a vicious cycle, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they weren't given education and upbringing because they were perceived as inferior, and because they didn't have education and upbringing, they would have perpetuated
Weighted the inferiority.
that inferiority and so forth, and
So on.
it just keeps going
Right.
on.
And so her conclusion was both genders contribute to inequality and keep women in that vicious cycle. And then in the 19th century, we have what's called the feminine ideal. And if you can put together the timeline, 19th century, this is when a certain image of women's proper role and sphere came. A lot of it came from England. It was the Victorian age. It was the time when women had a proper role and sphere in life and in community, and men had one too. The time when feminists reacted to this cultural inequality was a time when the feminists were poo-pooed, swept under the carpet, and kept silent. These dissenting female voices had little or no social influence. But as we go toward the middle of the 19th century, we start hearing these calls coming out for education reforms, employment reforms, and marital law reforms. One of the women, you might recognize her name from any history text during this 19th century, was Florence Nightingale. She's famous for what profession?
Nursing.
Being a nurse. She started her nursing education here in America and could go no further because of all the roadblocks. So she went to France and finished her degree in nursing. But she held to the conviction that women had all of the potential of men, just none of the opportunities. So, what's this overarching theme running through the 18th and 19th centuries? Women's exclusion from education was the central cause for their being relegated to the domestic realm and being denied any social advancement. Historically, the feminist movement, though, is characterized by an analogy, and it's called the wave, like an ocean wave analogy. In the 19th and 20th century, the first wave, if you're recalling any of this from your social studies, it was the suffrage movements. Not that women were suffering, but the suffrage referred to the right to vote. That was the word for the women giving the equal right to vote. So feminist activity in the English-speaking world sought to win women's suffrage, female education rights, better working condition, and an abolition of gender double standards. In America, that same movement of women who fought for the abolition of slavery turned to championing women's rights. You hear of such women now as Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and some of those women. By 1913, equality and differences were seen as routes to women's empowerment. You give them equality, you take away these differences in gender equality, and you're going to empower women. So women became more involved in politics, economics, employment, sexualities, families, war, and peace. Those were the women's issues. And a constitutional amendment for equality. Strangely, the church was seen as the major obstacle to women's rights. Now think about that. You would think the church would champion the right way to treat women and giving them opportunities for empowerment and advancement. But the church was seen as the major obstacle. And this is the reason Elizabeth Cady Stanton, that famous suffragette who fought for that 19th Amendment, why she turned her back on the church. American first wave feminism is considered to have ended when that 19th Amendment passed in 1919, which granted women the right to vote in all states. But we're going to hear another woman's name that pops up in this first wave. Margaret Sanger. Birth control advocate, sex educator, writer, and nurse. She appears. And we know her as the founder of the organization that eventually evolved into Planned Parenthood.
Let's not forget she was also a eugenicist.
Right. All the articles I read in regard to Margaret Sanger really toned down that part of her resume. She also held to the idea that church and Christianity is to blame for the suppression of any discussion of sexuality and birth control. That's our song for the bunny trail.
Yeah.
Margaret Sanger was an inspiration for Wonder Woman. William Marston was influenced by early feminist thought, later formed a romantic relationship with Margaret Sanger's niece, and several Wonder Woman storylines were inspired by Margaret Sanger. Off the bunny trail. We have the second wave. This was the early 1960s to the late 1980s. This is when I was a teenager. Okay? The second wave largely was concerned with other issues of equality, such as ending discrimination. This is when the big civil rights movement came to the forefront. Women are victims of a false belief that requires them to find identity and meaning in their lives through their husbands and children. Some of you out there in the audience, I even read this, had to, it was required, Betty Friedman's The Feminine Mystique. And this is the wave when the phrase women's liberation was first used. Bra burning was associated with the women's lib movement. And the 60s feminism was marked by some positive things. Marked female enrollment in higher education, the establishment of academic women's studies courses, and feminist ideology in fields of politics, sociology, history, and literature. In the 70s, some of you might remember this name, Gloria Steinem, her Ms. magazine. It's where she used her Ms. magazine to address more political and sexual issues. The third wave, from the 90s to now. This wave of feminism began in response to what young women perceived, oh, don't you love that word, perceived, as a failure of the second wave to go far enough, especially in social acceptance of sexual freedom and open encouragement of sexual liberation for women. The fourth wave. This is also referred to as the modern feminist ideology. This centers on reproductive freedom and abortion, equality in all areas of society, including the workplace, places of worship in the home, and personal power. It combines politics, psychology, and spirituality in their vision of change here. And then there is a cry for the combination of justice with this religious spirituality.
Susan, can I interject something?
Mhm.
Because this sticks in my craw. And here you get into this new speak, double speak, redefinition of terms.
Mm-hmm.
You said you put up there, and I know reproductive freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What they're talking about is they want the right to kill their babies.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that reproductive freedom? It's not. If you're killing your baby, you're not reproducing. What they want is the freedom to have sex with no consequences.
Okay.
That's really what they want.
Really what they want.
But they call it reproductive
freedom.
Well, it's not reproductive. It's sexual pleasure without consequences.
And you hold on to that,
Yeah,
because
I'm sorry.
probably in my second thought, you're
I'm
in
not
my
trying to
second
steal your
no,
thunder. I just
no,
irritates me.
I love it that you mentioned that, because it will come up again, and you're going to be back there going, absolutely. Before we hear from the Amen Corner about this justice, because we all care about justice, and we all care about spirituality, let's look at some of the nice things that this fourth wave, it inspired post-abortion talk lines, where women who are struggling with having an abortion can call and get encouragement and help after they've had an abortion. Pursuit of reproductive justice. In other words, abortions are affordable for some, but not affordable for others. This is one that makes me smile. Plus size fashion support. So now, you know, we don't have the twiggy look anymore, but the plus size, the fuller figure woman now has some support, because, you know, in a way, we chubbies have been demeaned and made fun of over time. And so I guess we could say that's a good thing. The feminist movement has really tried to show society that women of all sizes have worth and value, and you shouldn't judge somebody by their size. Transgenderism support, male feminism, and sex work acceptance. That's the modern feminist ideology. So we've been waved. There's your 4 waves. But the underlying theme in all 4 of these, equality for men and women, but now that equality reaches deeply personal and spiritual aspects of men and women's lives. How to reach those goals. How do you reach the goals of equality, gender equality, freedom from oppression? It still involves those 3 words: authority, control, and submission. We have seen in this brief historical overview the ebb and flow. And you know, if you think of a wave, you think of the peak and the retreat. And every one of these eras, you've had the really peak of that movement, and then it kind of ebbs. And then something happens, and then it crashes to the forefront again. The wave analogy is not perfect, and there's lots of criticisms for this analogy everywhere. But it gives an understanding of who has contributed to feminism and what the meanings are. Evangelicals, Christians, or whatever title you tack onto your religious views, have grown more likely to embrace not only the word feminism, but the ideology as well. They may change their moniker to egalitarian or complementarian, or they may spiritualize their beliefs by adding or changing their label to Christian feminist, a womanist, evangelical feminist, new wave feminist, or Jesus feminist. Jesus feminist author Sarah Bessey remarked how much Christian women like her, here's her quote, share the core values of today's feminist movement. Wave a red flag. Do I need to repeat that?
Today's feminist movement?
How much Christian women like her share the core values of today's feminist movement. And then I'm yelling at her picture on the screen. Which feminist movement? You said today's feminist movement. But which of today's feminist movement are you sharing? Well, choosing a feminist platform in which to align that personal ideology you have is like going to a grocery store to purchase cereal for your children. You park in aisle 3 with your cup of Starbucks because selecting cereal is going to be a major stressor, especially if you're a label reader. In choosing a feminist ideology, you have to be a label reader. So which feministic movement's core values do I want to align with? Are we going to do the proto-feminism, the post-feminism, the French feminism, the anarchist feminism, the social feminism, the radical, the separatist, the liberal, the black, the post-colonial, the third world, the multiracial, the libertarian, the environmental? Yes, there are eco-feminism movements. Feminist theology, New Age feminism, Christian feminism, Islamic feminism, Jewish feminism, Wiccan feminism, which teaches witchcraft is every woman's right. Riot girl, sex-positive feminism, pro-feminism, and anti-feminism, and intersectional feminism, and I'm sure I did not get them all. So as you see,
Read all of them. I love it.
I did. As you see, there are as many brands of feminism as there are cereal. And there are as many brands of feminism as church denominations.
Well, it's like religion. You get to choose your authority.
So, let's ask the same question. Why so many kinds of feminism? Don't all women want and need the same things? Well, okay. Why so many different denominations of churches? Don't all people want and need the same gospel? Well, when you answer that second question, you just might have the answer to the first one. Liberal feminism. I chose the right cereal, didn't I? Lucky Charms. An overview. The purpose is to gain equal rights for men and women, reform modern society, but notice it says by revolutionary means. Women should enter all male-dominated occupations, including athletics and cultural activities previously reserved for men, and gender integration is vital to the achievement of their goals. And how is it going to happen? Legal change is the principal avenue for emancipation of women. So in other words, if it's going to be legal, it's got to have some governmental backing law connected to it. But the summary: equality, gender integration, emancipation. Okay?
It's interesting how whether liberal feminism or other kind of liberalism wants the authority of state enforcement just like the foundations of religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
It is.
And their motivations are noble and just and moral, but their means are flawed because they've started with the wrong assumption.
Right. Started with the wrong assumption. So You have the anti-patriarchy. That's big. I've read hundreds and thousands of pages on feminism, and that word patriarchy, they must love that word. Gender integration, and that's important because it's not female or feminine integration. You've got to watch that word gender. And then emancipation, which means freedom from oppression. So, do you see any of these lucky charms you want to put in your bowl? If you're collecting some core beliefs as a Christian feminist?
The first one.
Only the first one. And I'm going to comment on that first one later. Might be in my last talk. So now we have radical feminism. Perfect cereal. Rice Krispies. And what's the first word you see? Patriarchy. Patriarchy is the most basic of social institutions. And patriarchy divides society into sex classes, which means women are a sex class. And then that, in turn, causes that social struggle between men and women. So then all women are allies in the struggle against men and the patriarchal social institutions that men support. Notice this line. Men are difficult, if not impossible, to change.
We're not supposed to.
Often favors a biological interpretation of masculinity and femininity. But unlike liberal feminism, women who are radical feminists believe you should not participate in male-dominated organizations. You know why? Because they hold to complete separation of the sexes. Complete separation of the sexes in order to achieve the goals. So you see the same things. Equality, which according to them is anti-patriarchy, gender equality, and freedom from oppression.
So basically, let's just call it reverse sexism. Like reverse racism. But you see, but see, women can't be sexist because they're the oppressed ones.
They're the oppressed.
Only men can be sexist because they're the
oppressors.
Just like only white people can be racist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
You're
so the way
seeing
to solve white racism is for blacks to perpetrate black racism against whites.
Right.
Same thing.
Same ideology. I'm going to give you some quotes here before we move on to another form of feminism. Robin Morgan. I feel that man-hating is an honorable and viable political act. That the oppressed have a right to class hatred against the class that is oppressing them.
Yeah, this is the same thing. This is the same thing, just a different demographic.
Right. And then Andrea Dworkin. I won't say anything about that last name. Sexism is the foundation of which all tyranny is built. Every social form of hierarchy and abuse is modeled on male over female domination. Possibly, in part true.
So the solution is to replace one form of tyranny
with another. So, in your bowl of agreeing with our Jesus feminist Sarah, where we're going to choose the core values that we can agree on, do any of these snap, crackle, pop your ideology? Any of those?
I don't see anything in that one. No.
All right, now we have social feminism.
Maybe if we put some sugar in it.
Well, guess what? Smurfberry Crunch will take care of it. Social feminism tries to integrate socialism and feminism. So here we get this political ideology, which if you look at the second point is Marxist ideology. Because the social feminists believe that their goals can only be achieved within a socialist society. What is happening in our government today, the Democratic Party in particular is turning I'm sure there's Republicans too, but we're turning more and more toward that socialist ideology of government because it's supposed to be the perfect way to cure everything. Existing social organizations are male-dominated and must be reformed along what kind of lines?
Government.
Feminist lines. The emancipation of women cannot happen in a capitalistic society. Men and women have to work together to eliminate patriarchy and capitalism. So you have your social feminist movement. They try to get men on board claiming, you know, this affects you too, but let's work together to get rid of patriarchy, which is male domination, and capitalism. And all will be well. You see any of these Smurfy ideologies that you'd like to add to your Christian feminist platform? Because you still have the same things: equality, gender equality, and freedom from oppression. Only you just change the definition for each group. And now we have it. Christian feminism. Aren't you just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? Some Christian feminists believe that gender equality within the church cannot be achieved without rethinking the portrayal and understanding of God as a masculine being. So we can't have gender equality in the church if we attach any masculine attribute, characteristic, or name to God, because that's masculine. And so, therefore, a masculine God cannot understand the needs of woman. So we focus on the feminine aspects of God and Jesus by using gender neutral or feminine language and imagery to describe God and Christ. This is where we get Sophia as part of the Godhead. Christian feminism seeks to advance and understand the equality of men and women morally, socially, spiritually, and in the leadership realm from a Christian perspective. And God does not discriminate based on biologically determined characteristics such as sex and race. So if we abolish gender-based roles in the church, in society, and family, all will be well. We'll have equality. And then we have gender justice. Male violence against women, challenging patriarchy in the church, and gender inequality in the church and home. I do agree with this gender justice here, where if a man wants to violate a woman, harass a woman, hurt, abuse, there should be consequences. A woman should be protected, and there needs to be justice. Paul's been supporting these missionary kids and others who have had their justice denied by the church because of what's happened to them. I can agree with let's have some justice when there is abuse and violence against women. In summary, we have it again. There's that patriarchy, anti-patriarchy, gender equality, and freedom from oppression. So any of you cuckoo for any of these ideologies? I think we might can take a couple puffs out of there.
The only comment I would have to make on that would be I would note that this is still within the context of the institutional church.
Mm-hmm.
And as Paul has kept hammering over and over and over again, the body of Christ is not an institution, it's a family.
It's a family.
And you're going to have, these are the exact same kind of issues you're going to have in an institution because of the authority,
Mm-hmm.
because it requires authority.
It requires authority and submission to that authority.
Right. When you've got a family environment with a home fellowship, all these problems go away. They take care of themselves.
Either that or they're taken care of rightfully and
Exactly.
quickly and not hidden.
Exactly. So they become non-issues.
They are non-issues.
Because they're dealt with. They're dealt with just in the course of a family situation.
In the family livelihood of a fellowship, right. We have the intersectional feminism. Yes, there is an incredible cereal. I was kind of surprised at this word, intersectional feminism, but it came up in some of the interviews of women that were at the Women's March after Trump's inauguration. And This intersectional feminism refers to the overlapping factors of race, gender, how women of color experience challenges beyond the agenda set by white feminists, and it also refers to factors of religion. Here's a quote from Brittany Cooper, who is a professor at Rutgers. Intersexuality simply means that there are lots of different parts to our womanhood. And these layers were referenced in the mission statement of the infamous Women's March, which in my second talk I will lay out what the mission statement of that Women's March is. She says we support the advocacy and resistance movement that reflect our multiple and intersecting identities. We call on all defenders of human rights to join us. Simply incredible, don't you think? In the forms of feminism that I've illustrated here, which I believe are just examples of the totality of the ideology of the movement, there are 4 ideas held in common. Equality between men and women, that's having to do with patriarchy and male dominance. Gender equality, this is sometimes referred to as gender justice, which includes, now get this long list of letters, which I had to look up. Remember how it used to be the LGBT? It is now the LGBTQIAAP. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transqueer, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, ally, pansexual rights. And freedom from oppression. Every group will come up with their own definitions of these 4 terms.
And you know what's ironic is, you know who's most upset about that? The gays and the lesbians.
Yeah. Because it diminishes
right.
it diminishes their call for
Because
justice.
they hijack their movement.
But you look at those 4 terms that I gave: equality, gender equality, oppression, patriarchy. Okay. And all of these forms of feminism have their own definition for it. So you've got to watch, just like Andy said, each one. On the surface, you know, we can say, oh, okay, I can agree with that. But you have to find out, what are they defining? So with each definition, I've included a quote that illustrates some sort of meaning. Equality. The Merriam Dictionary says equality is a measure of value or state of being, equal in agreement, equally balanced. Charles Montesquieu, the love of democracy is that of equality. So, women want equality between the sexes. They want equal agreement, equal balance. Gender